everybody. So a few days ago I did a video going over the Scorpion update that's going live next month, telling you guys all that was going to be in that update for Age of Wonders 4. I said in that video that I was going to try to refrain as much as I could from giving my opinion so I could keep the length of the video down, and I said I'd do a follow-up video after I had some experience with the update on my thoughts. I now have a lot of experience with the update, and this video is going to be my thoughts. I did a video about a week ago on Menace talking about the game, and I said at the beginning of the video that despite it about to be 40 minutes of critique, that I did really like the game, and just because I'm really good at giving critique and like giving critique does not mean that I do not like the game. Much like that, in this video I will be giving lots of critique and feedback and my thoughts on many of these features, and that does not mean I do not like Age of Wonders 4. I was going to do a video like this on the Vampire expansion because I thought there were a lot of issues with that Vampire expansion. However, because I think a lot of people thought that that expansion had issues, I didn't much want to kick a puppy when it was down, so to speak. I think many people knew that the multiplayer had some serious sync issues, that there were some serious balance issues in the game, and that overall the experience just wasn't as good as it could have been, and I didn't feel like piling in on that. I did make a very large forum post, I gave lots of feedback, I gave as much as I could, but I didn't do a video and I just moved on. Some people didn't like that I wasn't doing Age of Wonders content, but I was kind of biting my tongue at the time, like, okay, I guess, like, if I talk about this game, I'm gonna have very negative opinions, and I just, like, I don't feel good beating down on a smaller studio, so to speak. So this video, however, will be giving as much feedback as I can on that game. I did do a Patreon post. I use Patreon because it helps me organize my thoughts. You can see I have lots of organization here and helps you guys read it as well. This is a free post. I'll put it down in the comments. You can click on it and read it. However, if you do want to join my Patreon and support me, that is extremely nice. I do live a very modest lifestyle, as you can see, and a modest lifestyle is getting more and more expensive these days. So in the past I've not, actually just directly asked you guys for support, but this time I feel I might have to. So before I go any further, please do make sure to like, please make sure to subscribe, and please make sure to leave a comment down below. All these things help me out immensely. Now, the Age of Wonders community has probably been the best community for helping push my videos. I think only the Stellaris, and somehow the Oblivion community got close to that. I apologize for the squeaky chair. Stellaris streamed terribly, but man, people really liked those videos, and they really like to share them around with other people. For this video, this isn't going to be a guide or anything like that, so I'll try to keep this a bit more freeform and move from topic to topic in long, unbroken sentences. And so we'll try to, just move on with it. But this will be a very long video, and this will be going over all my thoughts. And I promise you this will be interesting. But this will probably be second monitor interesting or going to sleep interesting. Yeah, so anyway, let's start going through all my thoughts on this stuff here. Number one, the XP system changes. If you, for some reason, did not watch my video on what was coming with the Scorpion update, then I'll try to briefly summarize everything, but you really should go watch that video first, but I will try to. Currently, the change in the beta, and this will like 99.9% go live, is that all XP needed to level has been increased by 10 times. So if you need 2 XP to level, it's now 20. If you needed 10 XP to level, it's now 100. However, combat XP has gone up 5 times. Meaning effectively the amount of experience needed to level has been doubled. However, you have been given 10 experience per turn just by default, so you get much less XP in combat by half, but you get passive experience. Very, very, very good system. I listed this under the good changes. I think this is probably the best change right here. I don't really have any comments on this. This is great system. The only things I could suggest right here is that, well, the first thing I say is storing armies rather than just saving gold by waiting right until you're going to fight is actually a boon now. It makes Stonewalls meaningful building. I do want to talk about that real quick, right as we talk about the experience changes. A lot of people always wondered why in our multiplayer games, or even when I played single player, I would just rarely build an army. It's because by not building an army and not paying upkeep, I could just continue to level with my heroes as much as I could. And I could use all that stored up gold to get more production, more food, well, probably not food, production, research, draft, and then when I was attack, I could just start spam buying out people, spam summoning, and I would have so much of an advantage of having these built up cities that I would end up winning every single time against the AI and even against other players. Because if you're paying for an army, it's a bad thing. One of the things this XP system did, particularly because stone walls give you 15 XP in addition to the 10 flat XP, is that actually having an army, even if it's not fighting, because combat XP is always divided by minimum 6, meaning 6 units is... If you have more than 6 units, you're stealing some experience from your heroes and lord. So 6 units is always the ideal amount that you want to clear content and level with. So having more than 6 didn't make sense, but now you can sit those extra units above those 6 in your cities and get them leveled up. So there is some advantage. I'm not saying it's worth it, but there is a bit of an advantage. But one thing I think is that this system could be really expanded. I do understand that this is kind of the developer's first draft on this system, and they'll flush it out more in the future. But just, I'm not going to read this sentence by sentence. I'm not just going to go through it. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But my general thoughts here, I think they could expand this system a bit more. Things like maybe the Chaos Affinity gives you the ability to generate experience while pillaging, or the Shadow Affinity gives you experience while you're in opposing territory. The one that heals you when you're in opposing territory, maybe that one could give you experience for also being in opposing territory. The Chaos one that makes pillaging better, maybe it also gives you like 30 experience for the turn that you're pillaging. I just had some thoughts. They can now give away experience a bit more freely, maybe to non-heroes to keep it a bit more reasonable, but you get the idea, right? They could give out experience a bit more freely now, because instead of needing like 4 XP to get a unit rank, you need 40. So they can kind of give experience away in like, you know, terms of 15, 10, and they'll still feel decent because it won't just be 1 or like half of an experience. And yeah, I just think that it could be fleshed out a little bit. Now, my critiques here are champion lords are underpowered. As many of you know, champion lords are a lord. Whenever it's applicable, I'll try to just go to here because the game is pretty good at this sort of stuff. Champion lords are pretty good at giving experience, right? They give 20% experience from combat. But I did just mention that combat experience was reduced by half in return for passive XP gain. Well, now you're probably noticing both issues here, right? Champion lords gave combat XP 20%, which is now worth half as much, and they gave XP per turn. They used to give 2 XP per turn, now they give 10. Well, you're probably noticing the problem, right? They're giving half as much effective combat XP as they used to, and they're giving half as much effective XP to their units per turn as they used to. That means champions, which are already the weakest lords in the game, are now half as strong in 2 of the different tasks that they do. So, Tome of Revelry also got a nerf because combat XP was reduced by half. So Tome of Revelry also got a bit of a nerf, being one of the only actually good tomes in Chaos. Revels of Carnage was giving 30% more to experience. Now that is not as good. Sorry, my mouth gets dry when I talk so much. Now that is not as good, Tome of Revelry could be buffed. Probably the Carnival of Flesh, because it's so weak right now. Carnival of Flesh is a terrible SPI, just a thought. Okay. That's just the champion and racial hero XP per turn. And then also in addition to that, Chaos Affinity had a boost where they could get 50% more experience to tier 1 units in combat. That's also looking a little mediocre right now. I think, frankly, the racial hero XP per turn could be doubled back to effectively what it used to be. I think the Chaos Affinity 50% XP to tier 1 units could also have just like also 10 XP per turn to tier 1 units, maybe even 10 XP per turn to tier 2 units. I think Tome of Revelry could just get its SPI buffed. Right now it's 7 draft, 7 food. I think that could just straight up to go, that could go up to like 15 draft, 15 food. Compared to what some of these other SPIs do, if we look at like the Tome of the Bloodright, 15 draft, 5 per farm, and then 10 mana whenever you fight a battle. So Tome of Revelry could probably go to like 15 food, 15 draft, and then a little bit per adjacent farm. I'm just saying like they could buff it up like a little bit to compensate for that. World map movement got nerfed, for those of you guys who once again don't know. All world map movement is now 40. There's no longer a 32, 48, and 40. It's now just all 40. So you don't need mounts. Huge boon, beg, buff, nothing. I mean, I've no further comment, just absolutely massive improvement. I want to make a small note here that while I was making my hero video, which I hate making videos because every time I make them, they get outdated, like the next expansion. It's like a curse, I swear. But hero weapons are now significantly more diverse because you do not need a mount. A lot of people complained that I would always just take a lance, a generic lance on my warriors. That's because it made you move the fastest. So like, why wouldn't you take a lance, right? A lot of people complained why I wouldn't even take the crowbow on my ranger. And I was like, because it doesn't give you a mount. It's not the fastest, right? So basically, every weapon should now be the same effective power level on the world map. Should be. I mean, I haven't personally tested them. That's what I'm saying. They should be the same power level. And it's only their combat differences, whether or not you're mounted, whether or not you start with the mount. So, hero weapon balance is significantly better right now. Defense resistance update. Okay, so they added a new class, the Magical Fighter. It's a bit screwy, which I'll go into in a second, but all defense now affects any melee damage, and all resistance now affects magic damage. If you have elemental damage on your melee attack, it is still reduced by defense. If you have physical damage on your magical attack, it is still reduced by resistance. Do you understand? I think it's an improvement to the game making sense, even if, well, as I say here, this update is an improvement to the game making sense, even though it doesn't make sense to a lot of people at a glance, but some things do need to be smoothed out. Melee magic attacks are now considered pure magic if they were melee before the update. This means that any sort of evasion affects them. This includes Tome of Shades or rapid reflexes or anything. So if you have any sort of if you have any sort of evasion, for example, from the Living Shadows, that 10% evasion does affect magical units, even if they hit you with a melee attack. So if we look at the Tome of Zeal, the Summon Zealot is now a magic fighter. So this melee strike he has here with its magic base, this will actually get a 10% evasion penalty if he's trying to fight Tome of Shades. With Tome of Shades and rapid reflexes, he would only have 65% accuracy to hitting you in melee. Now, that's obviously not a good thing, and it frankly makes these magic fighters quite underpowered. Magical fighters also need a lot of work on enchantments. They often become significantly weaker in a build that uses other melee, which makes them feel awkward. Unlike battle mages, they aren't range, so trying to upgrade them and melee in order to get magical damage into your build feels weird, since they'll clog up the front line. Sometimes what I write isn't perfect. I have ADHD and dyslexia, and sometimes I write things and like it totally makes sense in my brain. Then I come back like an hour later and I'm like, what the hell was I trying to write? Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that the enchantments right now are currently really, really awkward. For example, if I was to try to go nature, and I was going to try to do a typical build where I just go beasts. Oh, Tome of Roots with beasts, because I got Tome of Cycles, puts decay on enemies automatically. So Blight Blades with Tome of Cycles, I now do 10% more damage against decaying people, which I will do. So I go Blight Blades, which affects skirmishers, polearm, shock, shield, fighter, but not magical fighter. Then magical fighter gets affected not by poison arrows either. Wait, so not here and not here. So spiders, the high-end ones, like Ice Spider Matriarch, is now considered a magical fighter. And she gets literally no buffs from Tome of Roots. As you can imagine, this means that most of these units that became magical fighters are actually nerfed now. I do think that this was undercooked a lot. I think that the devs needed a bit more time on this one. This is a beta. It will not be going live for another 2 to 3 weeks, but it's a bit concerning to me because a lot of these systems are currently really weak on magical fighters, like really, really weak. So, yeah. Some edge cages like Chaos Eater now exist. Now, let's talk about Chaos Eater, and I'll say exactly what I'm talking about. Chaos Eater is still considered a battle mage, despite being melee, because he has 3 range on his attack. But as I've shown you, it doesn't matter that he has 3 range on his attack, because he gets affected by evasion, but also magical fighters get affected by evasion. So there's really no difference other than he has 3 range, which makes him a battle mage. But he's clearly a magical fighter. In all intents and all purposes and everything he does, he's a magical fighter. The only thing that being a battle mage does now, because all magical fighters get 90% of battle mage enchantments. If we actually look through here, let me just clarify that for you. If I look through, I don't know, Shadow, Necrotic Projectiles, this now affects battle mage, support, range, skirmisher, and magical fighter. So pretty much every battle mage enchant also affects magical fighters. So the only thing that Chaos Eater being a battle mage does instead of a magical fighter is mean that he doesn't get defensive enchantments. That's it. That is literally the only change right now. So example, if we look at Tome of Calamity, Accursed Armors is used to buff up magical fighters to be a bit tankier, but not battle mages. So there are some edge cages and there are some things that weren't quite worked out. Again, and I did mention this in my other video, Triumph normally is slow to a fault on making changes. This one in particular feels very awkward to me. There are also some other edge cages like Umbral Mistress, which you could argue she should stay a mythic, but now that there's this magical fighter class in the game, it would work absolutely perfectly for her, so it's a bit awkward. Culture updates. Lots of cultures have received lots and lots and lots of changes that have rebalanced the game and done very well. High culture now properly buffs fighters, shock units, and fighters. Don't worry. I think I meant to say mythics. Fighters, shock units, and mythics. So they can awaken them and actually get them boosts. Big buff. It's still tedious and micro heavy to play, though. All cultures now freely affect mythic units with their enchantments. You no longer need to awkwardly play feudal or mystic summoning to buff mythics. Much better balance in the long term. So in the past, you had to play feudal, who gave buffs to units in their stacks in order to buff mythics, or you had to play mystic summoning in order to buff mythics. No one else buffed them. So it was awkward that if you wanted to do an actual mythic late game build, that these were the 2 best for it. However, now all cultures can give their enchantment to mythics, which in my opinion is much better for the game's long-term health, and it's just better for the game's long-term health. Mystic summoning probably needs to be a bit compensated for this one though, as that was their whole shtick, was that they were the culture for buffing mythics. Now they don't. Now, or I should specify, they're now not the only culture that buffs mythics. So I definitely think that mystic summoning could use a little bit of a compensation here because they kind of lost their one thing. Then I also think feudal got a lot of nerfs last expansion, and now everybody else got buffed up to their level on this expansion. So I definitely think feudal should maybe get a bit of compensation as well. And Reaver just still feels terrible. Frankly, I think they should do something for Reaver. I know they're planning to rework them, but there is such a thing as a band-aid, a short-term help, because Reaver does not feel good to play. Okay. Primal has seen a significant rebalance on a lot of their different stuff because they were not considered a very good culture. They started off pretty decent, but just years of power creep have caught up with them, and they just never were very good. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's been a while since they've been good, if they were ever good. The Primal Protector, who had an absolutely terrible ability, now doesn't. He has a free use Primal Renewal. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to get nerfed or not. I don't feel like it should get nerfed. I've used it a lot, and I don't feel like it should get nerfed. This has kind of been weird because it feels very weird to just have a unit that can just heal every turn and go into defense mode. But it does make him a very unique shield unit. It does give him a unique role, and it doesn't seem to be overpowered from the tests we've had, but it just feels weird. It's like this isn't breaking the game, but is this legal? So that definitely has buffed the Protector a lot. The Primal Charger went up by 10 HP, and Charge Strike now generates 2 stacks of Rising Fury on use, as does Cleaving Charge. I don't think Primal Charger is good. We'll go over it with the Charge rework, but basically tier 1 chargers seem to do okay, but every charger after tier 1 just seems to fall off a goddamn cliff and be miserable. And we'll go over that later. Animist, spiritual healing no longer gives the person is healing Primal Fury. Instead, it now eats Primal Fury in order to heal even more and to cleanse even more once they get to the champion. This thing's buggy right now. I have to like move really quick. So yeah, once you're a champion, you can dispel negative status effects by spending Primal Fury. So the Animist is now much better at healing. Cooldown 1, you can spend it to heal, attack, and then that gives you even more healing. Summon the Primal Animal no longer requires you to have stacks as well, so you don't need to sit in the corner and heal each other to then summon the Primals anymore. Much better for gameplay as a whole, and so you can just freely use it once per battle. Way better on the Animist, way stronger. And Stressor Warden did get buffed a little bit by the racial buffs, otherwise not really changed. Okay. So that just sums up Primal. Now for heroes, okay. This is just a big critique on heroes because a lot of them are just not viable right now. The nerfs to Scattershot definitely helped Ranger be reined back in, as Ranger was just really unfun. For those of you guys who don't know, the multiplayer was, even single player, if you really wanted to be abusive, it was devolving down to spamming Scattershot, even going triple Ranger builds to triple Scattershot, because when you got a kill on Ranger, it reset your cooldowns. What you could do on Ranger is Scattershot over a group of enemies, kill one of them, reset all your cooldowns, next turn Scattershot. That meant you could also use, go for the kill, or whatever their 50% damage boost is. You could use that every turn because it got reset every turn. You could also use abilities like Bless every turn because it was a free action and you reset its cooldown over and over. Scattershot was just way too strong. Very dominant, and just a bunch of Rangers AoE spamming enemies every single turn was ridiculous. So definitely good for game balance. Night Path Warriors are still terrible. Now those are warriors who specialize in charging. That's the left side of the tree. These guys are terrible. They're miserable. I have a thing right here. Let me see if this actually works here. Yeah, so here we have warrior. This path right here, down the left side of warrior, it gives you all these boosts on after you use a charge. So if you use a charge after moving, you inflict weaken, you inflict distracted, you have a chance to taunt, etc, etc. These for the most part are useless because at the end of the day, units that you charge should be dead. They shouldn't be alive and in a situation where you need to CC them. No, they should be dead. So if you go the center path with Berserker, you do a lot of damage and you kill people. And people that are dead stop fighting back. Then, by going the Berserker path, you can then also get some crit, potentially execute, and just generally a better tree. If you go the left path, you debuff people that are dead. Debuffing people that are dead is not very strong, let me tell you. Dead people are already pretty debuffed. They got the ultimate debuff on them, in fact. So, frankly, the Night Path is just not very good. Elementalist is only feels good if you get to late game Elementalist with the Yu-Gi-Oh playstyle. The Yu-Gi-Oh playstyle is where you just constantly reset your abilities and use some items and stuff to just go infinite. That is with Ritual of Elements. Use Ritual Elements, it refreshes all your ability cooldowns, and it leaves you with 1 AP. So you run up, use the dash that allows you to still move after it, Elemental Gateway. You run up, deal damage with Elemental Gateway, use a bunch of abilities that leave you with 1 AP, often from Vampire Lord. Then you use Ritual of Elements, then you spam all your abilities again. It's really lame, but it is what I like to call the Yu-Gi-Oh gameplay. You just use like 7 abilities in a turn. If you get to that point, then Elementalist is good, but before that point, Elementalist is really bad. They're really bad at clearing the map, they're really bad at doing damage, their abilities are bad. The only thing they really do is buff the Eldritch and sometimes the Dragon. That's because a lot of these Elementalist abilities and effects, I should say skills, are just here, gain magic damage, or attacks get more damage if the enemies are burning, or damage against debuffed enemies, or magic attacks get more damage, blah, 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 right? So these affect all the magic abilities on things like elementalists, from elementals affect things on eldritch. So elemental is good on eldritch, sometimes it's good on dragons if you're doing a breath build, but it's not good if you are being what I like to call here a mortal. So I've suggested this in the past, but one thing I think that the devs should consider doing is making Elementalist Mortal and Elementalist Dragon Eldritch, etc. Because Mortal Elementalists just do not have these extra abilities that things like Eldritch have. If I look over here, Ruler type Eldritch, we can see that Eldritch Sovereign will get like the Forgotten Tome of Arcfire, giving them the Arcfire Typhoon, Blazing Chain Lightning, and Arcfire weapons. Mortals can't do that. Mortals don't have anything like that. And so they just have less abilities, and their abilities that are weaker. So they have less abilities and they're weaker than Eldritch, but Eldritch gets the same buffs for these super strong abilities. I hope that makes sense. Basically, you use Elementalist and you use it to buff the Eldritch abilities, but if you're playing a Mortal, you don't get these strong abilities, you don't get a Dragon Breath, and therefore you have to use the Elementalist abilities, which are not very strong. Paladin Path Battle Saints are still cosplaying as really bad warriors, simply not tanky enough to be a frontline without a special lord, who would rather use that tankiness for the raw damage of a warrior or frontline defender. Deals reasonable damage, but doesn't have any clever mobility tricks or taunt or any CC at all. Defender warrior both outpace them. Now by that what I mean is that let's go do champion and Battle Saint here. When you do Battle Saint, you can see a serious problem. There's no health. There's no health here at all. Although Battle Saint did get helped a little bit by getting the 1 defense here and the 2 defense here, that's 3 defense and then I think 4 here. So they get 4 defense, which is a lot of defense. And that is a lot of damage reduction from melee. You can see a consistent problem here. There's no health. The people that do get health are the people like the Giant King and the Dragon Lord. The Giant King, because they just start the game with more health. They just straight up have more health, period. Then they get more health from their Rune of Creation over here. You can see 20 hit points over there. Then they can get more defense and more health and things like that from over here. You can see Vitality Rune, they get 15 HP. Champions can't do that. So if I was to play Giant King Battle Saint, it might make sense, except for the fact that warriors will also outscale them. Warriors will do significantly more damage and actually be a bigger threat to the battlefield, and then defenders will do more damage, ironically, while also just having more CC. Defender can get taunt at 1 point here, forcing enemies to run up to you. Warriors can also get, these are defenders. Defenders can get taunt. Defenders can also get tireless retaliators, so they can infinitely retaliate to everybody around them. Defenders are also really tanky. They can get 2 defense here when they're in defense mode, then always be in defense mode over here. They can get damage deflection over here, always deflecting 50% of the damage they receive, making it very difficult to actually kill them in a fair way. They can get lots of HP over here, 30 HP, 15 HP over here. They can also get the 2 defense over here, so they can get defense, defense, defense. That's 4 defense. That's actually 6 defense, so they're tankier. They're tankier than Paladins. They also deal more damage than Paladins. They retaliate more than Paladins. They have more CC than Paladins. What I'm trying to say here is the Battle Saint seems in between trying to be a warrior in just having these huge smite turns that kill people. They seem to be in between trying to do that, and then in between trying to be defender like, well, tanky like a defender. But they don't do as much damage as a warrior, and they're not as tanky as a defender, but also, arguably, they don't do as much damage as a defender to begin with. And defenders are doing pretty good right now with the XP nerfs. Although you might think that the clearing and XP nerfs hurt defender, it means that defender can now start the game with their spear, and they won't get slowed down on the world map for it, which gives them a big boost. Also, because you don't reach level 4 as quickly anymore. It means warrior quickly reaching level 4 than smashing the map is less powerful. Also, because the map generally deals way more damage, which I'll get down to in a second. a lot of animals got their damage buffed, and then the XP per turn applies to the enemies on the map, so they're way tankier, they do more damage because they just are higher veterancy. So the world map is far deadlier, encouraging you to use Defender. The Defender can also move on the world map, and it now calls into question, well, wait, why would I ever go a Paladin? So I just don't think Paladin is very good at all. Melee Ranger is still terrible, but I think that will inevitably be split off to its own class. Potentially DLC Assassin or something. More classes would be cool. And that's something that I think. I think more classes would just be cool. Lords are a huge part of the game, and heroes are a huge part of the game, and I think there should just be more of them. Potentially, they should maybe put a class type that you can only get from certain cultures or something. I'd like to see a lot more work done with these. Whenever the developers do touch lords and heroes, they do actually keep them reasonably balanced within each other. We have not seen any totally dominant hero classes. There have been some times, like when there was Giga Ritualist, and last patch there was Ranger, but even then there were some strategies with them, so they do a decent job keeping them reasonable with each other, I would say. Now, ruler types, they have made more ruler types, and I would say I want more classes than ruler types, because ruler types, I mean, they're both their own thing, right? So, I mean, I would like to see more content. 100 years, Age of Wonders 4, right? Then I think Death Knight is still Warrior at home. I don't need to show you, Death Knight is just Warrior at home. He's just not fulfilling his power fantasy. He's not doing anything cool. I think the devs would have probably liked to make Warrior a DLC class, but now they're locked into having him in the base game, and they'll probably have to remake him at some point. I think like it would be a dick move, but I feel like their best option would be to make him a DLC class, because they are a small studio. If they did do that, they could financially justify taking all the time to rework and give him unique abilities. But now I feel like they sort of written themselves into a corner like it's Game of Thrones, and they don't really know how to finish this story. And so Warrior has just sat there for like a whole year being absolutely terrible. Spellblade, I'll just generally say Spellblade's pretty creative. They're pretty cool. They actually, unlike Death Knight, got a bunch of cool stuff to them. They did get a bunch of cool, unique skill trees and things like that. Unfortunately, Spellblade runs into a serious issue where their kit didn't really synergize with a lot of the new changes. For example, here, all attacks ignore one resistance, but they're melee. They're melee and ranged, at least they're trying to do both. But one resistance does not only, well, that doesn't affect melee at all anymore. So this clearly needs to be changed to be either 2 resistance or 3 again, but then that would just make dragons better. In an ideal world, it would be 1 resistance, 1 defense, 1 status resist. That would be good. But I also think that this class just has to spend too much time. They have to get Arcane Skirmisher over here, which sucks. Then they need to get melee training over here, which sucks. Then they can finally start getting their good traits over here. They're actually good traits. That encourages a lot of people to just path down here. But then that's not exactly the best either. They also need melee mage over here, but frankly, I feel like the class should just start with melee mage. They're the melee mage class. Having to put a skill point into melee mage feels terrible. When other classes are putting points into things like 2 defense or 15 HP, your big middle of the tree boost is melee mage. Now you can use your abilities. Yay, you say. They also get Arcfire Burst over here, which is bad, frankly. I think this is just bad. 30 damage at this point in the game for full action is bad. I think if this one was maybe 20 fire, 20 lightning, entered defense mode with 1 AP, it might be worth using. But for now, it's terrible. They also do get an ability cooldown reset, but it does end your turn. So they seem to be the balanced version of Ranger. But Ranger can be picked. They're right there. So you can just go the balanced version of Ranger, or you can go the really strong version of Ranger called Ranger. Okay. Unit class rebalances. This update did do a lot of rebalancing on unit classes, and I think that's overall, I think it did a pretty good job, but there are still some issues. Shield units now feel good. Tier 3 units now feel far more closer and more reasonable with mythics and tier 4 units. Most tier 3 units did get boosted. a lot of them gained HP or some stats or things like that. So shield units are significantly better because their defense affects all melee damage now. Good. Tier 3 units are now feeling much better. But as I say here, many tier 4 units got buffed without really needing it. Makes them start to feel far and away from tier 3 despite tier 3 just getting buffed. So as we can see here, I don't think Exemplar is like amazing, but he's not amazing because of his tome. Let's say it's his tome that's keeping him down, right? Maybe not Exemplar, Warbreed. So Warbreed now is 130 HP. He's terrible. Like, this unit is terrible, but he's not terrible because of like his stats. He's terrible because charge units are bad, and frankly, I'll go over Warbreed in a second, but basically we look at Warbreed 135.2. That's a lot, right? And then when we go look at Berserker, here we go, you can see 104.2. So Warbreed goes up 1 tier, gains a defense and 30 HP. Now I think again Warbreed is terrible, but you can see that basically all I'm trying to say is that a lot of these units gained a lot of stats, and yeah, I want to make sure that tier 4 units aren't just like blatantly so good that you can never use tier 3s, at least until, as I mentioned later, that there's more available tier 4 racial units to pick from. Charge units got 10 HP but just still feel awful. Any charge unit without severe power creep, such as Tyrant Knight, just feels awful. Charge units need to apply some serious debuffs on their charge so they just don't get tanked and die. Early in the game, before you get lots of defense, before you get pikemen or anything like that, charge units do pretty good. Later in the game, it's almost impossible for a charge unit to get a kill. Just to give you an example here, we've got the Berserker, 24 damage, 100 HP. But then over here, 27 damage, 130 HP. The HP in the game went up by 30%, and he got 3 damage. He got 10% damage, but now people have 30% more HP. Charge units cannot kill you on the charge anymore, and if they're not on the charge, well, they suck. Let me close that real quick. So basically what I'm trying to say here is when we look at units like Tyrant Knight, he does do a thing here where when he charges units, he applies 2 stacks of weaken to them, or when he tramples, he does a AoE weakness. I think that's just what the devs need to do more to charge units. They need to disrupt enemy formations. There needs to be like a big charge followed by big debuffs. Charge units should be, maybe you shouldn't be fielding an entire field of them, but at the very least, having 1 or 2 charge units that can run in and debuff people, potentially to keep them locked down for battle mages, or to keep them off your heroes, or to just flank around your melee units. Like, that's how charge units should be being used, but right now that's just not how they're being used. And obviously if charge units could just run in and kill you, that wouldn't be good balance either. So they need to have a middle ground where they don't just run in and one-shot you, but then they need to actually do something after they run in. Tyrant Knight is power creeped, and he's still not very good. Like, he's good. He's just not that good. Like, he's a pretty good dude, though. I would actually say he's a pretty good cultural unit. Like, probably top 5. Well, maybe not. I don't know. He's good, though. But you can see he's got Despotic Vitality. Whenever he ends his turn next to an enemy unit, he heals, which is a lot of healing. And then, as I mentioned, AoE weakened or single target weakened. So this guy, he's got a lot going for him. He's got free healing. He's got the ability to weaken enemies. Like, Tyrant Knight has a lot going for him. And that's more how I see the Warbreed. I did write a lot on Warbreed. You can go read this if you want. But I remember it off the top of my head because I use this unit a lot so that I can lose every game I go him. Number 1, he has natural regeneration, but Tome of Dragons is now buffed up by the Chaos Tier 5 Tome. As you can see here, Demonic Siphon now affects dragons. The problem here is dragons give you natural regeneration. So here we have a unit with natural regeneration in a affinity that can get natural regeneration and then buff it. Therefore, I recommend, very simply, that the Warbreed should be given the special effect Unnatural Regeneration. Literally the same thing, but called Unnatural Regeneration. I'm stealing this from Total Warhammer 3. That way you can stack natural regeneration and unnatural regeneration. I'm not saying this would be a top tier build. I'm not saying that Dragon Warbreed would be amazing. I'm just saying that it should be possible to go both of them without overlapping some of their most powerful effects. Because like probably the most powerful thing in Dragon is natural regeneration, right? You could say it's a Dragon unit type with Draconic Rage. Maybe. I would say it's natural regeneration. So I would say that comboing Draconian Regeneration, Draconian Transformation, Natural Regeneration, words are hard, with the Warbreed should be more possible. You would heal 20% HP per round for free, which sounds like a lot, but probably would not amount to that much over the course of a game. Most units get killed in a turn. People generally don't like leaving enemies alive, because when you leave enemies alive, they tend to kill you. Second problem Warbreed has is his Charge Strike bleeds enemies. That's one of the big buffs they did. That doesn't do anything, frankly. They were trying to give it some synergy with some early tomes, but that is just not very good. Power Cleave is also not considered a single shot, so Power Cleave, as the game moves on, will actually do less damage than Charge Strike. Less damage than Charge Strike. The big Power Cleave that was made to, like, Warbreeds charge in, and then if they live to the next turn, then they can Power Cleave and do mega massive damage. But after it was nerfed to not give single shot, now it will be out damaged by Charge Strike. As you can imagine, this is not very good for the Warbreed, who now doesn't really give an enemies aren't threatened by Power Cleave, let's put it that way. Power Cleave should be massive, devastating. Actually allowing a Warbreed to live to get to Power Cleave should be a big show of things. However, Warbreeds right now, and actually, they're really just not a very good unit at all. They're just very terrible. So let's talk about what Warbreeds need. Number one, Charge Strike should not give bleeding. I kind of get it, but also it doesn't really make sense. I think that they need something, maybe Misfortune, maybe Slow, maybe, I don't know, something. They need some debuff. I would say Weakened, so that they could like run in and do an AoE Weakened on their charge, but Tyrant Knight kind of already stole that. We could just give it to the Warbreed too. I don't think that would be a terrible idea. But I definitely think that Charge Strike should get some sort of AoE debuff. Then Power Cleave should be changed to be single shot, and I don't think it should hit allies. Although hitting allies is a very chaos thing to do, Pyre Templars don't hit allies, and I don't think Warbreeds should either. It makes it very awkward to use them when you cleave into allies. It makes it so you often need to reposition. It doesn't feel fun. It's on a unit that's already not that good to begin with. And I think if you made it single shot and not hit allies, then it would generally be pretty good. Now, I do think Power Cleave applying bleed could make more sense. This is supposed to be your big AoE nuke, so not having a debuff on this would make sense. It could keep bleeding, but, you know, yeah. And then just change it to unnatural regeneration so you can combo it with dragons. I don't know if Dragon Warbreeds would be good, but, you know, at the very least, it might be. I don't know. Okay, tier 4 racials are still super limited. Would like to see more ways to obtain them than just from tomes. Cultural tier 4s would be nice. Alternatively, new methods of unlocking tier 4 units. So one of the problems as we go throughout the game is that it is very, very hard to get everything you need. You can only get 2 tier 3 tomes and 2 tier 4 tomes until you're at tier 5. You can go back and you can do like 2 tier 3s and then a 3rd tier 3 and then a 4th tier 3, but at the end of the day you get 4 tomes and then a tier 5, and you can continue to progress after a tier 5, but it means that your best bet then is to get 1 tome with a cultural unit, I should say a racial unit. So let's say if I'm chaos, right, it's your best bet in chaos to just go, if I'm trying to do Warbreeds because I want to lose another game, we do 1 tome for Warbreeds, then we do another tome for another buff, then we do another tome for Demon Gate to get our major racial transformation, maybe go Calamity to make them tanky, and then we own the Chaos Lord. You know, it's just some pathing like that. Basically, the problem is if I need to get multiple tier 4 units within tomes, it's going to end up being very, very difficult for me because a lot of these tomes aren't very good to begin with. Tome of Devastation is good for Warbreed, and Flame Volley is okay. Flame Burst Weapon is okay, and that's really it. And none of these are really so amazing that I would take them. If I didn't want Warbreed, I would not take this tome. Let's just be real, right? And so it's hard to justify realistically getting to tier 4 units. This means that often tier 4 units will be your highest tier best units, so you will just build them. If I unlocked Warbreed, I'll just continue to use Warbreed forever, because it's my highest tier unit I can build that's a racial unit. Now, this of course does get broken down when we talk about the Tome of Geomancy. With the change to defense resistance, it is very good to have some battle mages in the back now, because if the enemy doesn't stack resistance, the battle mages will shred them away. Tome of Geomancy gives you Geomantic Crystallization, which gives you some damage. It's a major racial transformation. This now gets boosted by tier 5 Chaos. That means that tier 5 Materium and tier 5 Chaos can use Geomantic Crystallization. Also seen here is the Geomancer, a tier 4 racial battle mage. Then seen here is a buff for your melee units. You might be understanding the problem here. If I want to get the Warbreed tome, I get Warbreed, a decent enchantment, and a combat spell that is decent right when you rush it but gets outscaled. Versus Tome of Geomancy gives me a very powerful battle mage and a powerful major race transformation and a melee buff. So I would need to get one less tome simply because I went Tome of Geomancy, because it's got a major race transformation and a tier 4 unit in it. Hypothetically, Tome of Geomancy could be comboed even with a tome like the Warbreed tome, and now I would have my major race transformation and I would have Warbreeds. To see the advantage here. That means that this tome would likely end up becoming one of the most picked tomes in the game. In other words, just what I'm asking for here is the developers probably should add more ways to get tier 4 units, tier 4 racial units. Either they should just add, again, tier 4 units to the cultural roster, which I would very much like, or we should start thinking of some ways to do it. Maybe in the campaign, there's a way like the ogres, how they added the ogre merchants into the game. Maybe at some point you can just buy a tier 4 racial unit to add to your roster. Maybe we've got some unlocks, you know. It's kind of like just a side, like an additional thing. Like tomes are great, but tomes being the only way to get tier 4 racial units is just not good for the longevity of the game, and it's not good for the build diversity of the game. Tier 2 units also just cost way too much to draft. I think that's been obvious for a very, very long time, and it is just an issue that the developers need to seriously consider. One of the reasons that a lot of people just don't go with these tier 2 units, for example, if we're looking at Industrious, why do we go Anvil Guard and skip to Bastion? Why don't we build Halberdier? Because the amount of draft that a Halberdier takes is 80%, somewhere like that, more than a tier 1 unit. You could almost get 2 tier 1 units for a tier 2 unit. However, going from tier 2 to tier 3 is only like a 50% increase in draft. Tier 2 units will get less buffs on your city because your cities will make tier 1 units draft at a higher recruit rank. They will often not have that intimidating a stat. So we look at the Halberdier to the Anvil Guard. He's certainly stronger. He certainly does more damage. He's certainly got Rune Retaliation, which is massively powerful. But we're not really seeing these base stats go up by some like insane amount that like I'd be willing to drop. I would not be willing to have half as many units to try to get Halberdiers, frankly. Let's just be real. Tier 2 units need a costless draft so you can get them out earlier, so you can get more of them out, and importantly, so you can actually get them out in a reasonable time before everybody's moved on to tier 3 units, because tier 3 units crush tier 2 units in stats. Alternatively, if we're not going to do that, the developers need to close the gap between tier 2 and tier 3 units in stats. Tier 2 units should maybe get more HP, or more defense, or more resistance, or something. Right now, tier 2 units, and I've mentioned this a lot, they're not good, and they haven't been good in a while. Read ever. They've never been good. So we have done some rebalances to the Tomes of Chaos. I want to talk about it. We're going to Chaos a little bit over Nature, then some other stuff. We're going to focus a lot on Chaos here. Let's talk about Tome of Pyromancy. Tome of Pyromancy get buffed, and it is terrible. It was terrible a while ago, but now it's somehow even more terrible. Why is that? So number one, fiery projectiles only affects base attacks, base physical range, and magic. Mages don't use base attacks, mages like to AoE. So there's problem number one, unfortunately. It gives only +1 damage and only to base attacks. To compare that to everybody's favorite Battle Mage Tome, Tome of Evocation, Tome of Evocation gives 2 damage to all attacks. A little bit better there, don't you think? Then Tome of Pyromancy gives a chance of burning. Instead of 2 damage, it gives a 60% chance of burning. Right out of this tome, we have Pyromancer, who already has a chance of burning. So that's not very good. Additionally, later down, Tome of Chaos Channeling was reworked a little bit to have the Flamer focus with Firebomb. Firebomb now only does burning. You can't apply burning. You can't apply 2 sources of burning added. So like this will give 2 stacks of burning, but it won't be 2 stacks of burning and then a 60% chance of burning from the fiery projectiles. It only stacks 1 source of burning, even though that 1 source of burning can add 2 sources of burning. Just go with it. So the fiery projectiles will not affect the Pyromancer, and it will only give 1 damage, and it will only affect base attacks, and it won't work on Firebomb later in the own affinity. So fiery projectiles is just not working. However, the Tome of Pyromancy also has a terrible SPI. Now, the Tome of Evocation also has a terrible SPI. Channeling Tower is not good at all, but what the Tome of Evocation does have is Fulmination. This is a 1 hex radius, 15 lightning damage, 60% chance to electrify. Over here in Chaos in the Tome of Pyromancy, we have Immolate. 1 hex radius, 10 fire damage, 15 extra if they're already burning. Now, while you might argue that this is better or worse, I would argue it's a side grade at best. Tome of Pyromancy then also loads us up with Ignite, which is a decent single target nuke, but now we have 2 combat spells in the tome. It's not very good to have 2 combat spells in the same tome. Going back to our good pal Evocation, instead of having 2 combat spells, it gets a world map spell. A powerful world map spell that stays relevant the entire game, reducing enemy lightning resist. It has been nerfed a lot, but it is still relevant on the world map. So, I would say it's a bit better. It also summons down the powerful Lesser Storm Spirit, who, while being a bit squishy, runs in, charges units, and does good damage. The Chaos Tome, on the other hand, has the Magma Spirit, who's very tanky, does basically no damage, over here at 9 damage, that's just pathetic, and that's it. So the Tome of Pyromancy is utterly obliterated by an Astral Tome. But it's also obliterated by the Tome of the Bloodright. That's right, the new DLC tome. The new DLC tome has a Blood Altar, 15 draft, 5 per adjacent farm, and 10 mana whenever you win a battle. Well wait, here we build an entire Ritual Pyre to get 10 mana per turn, and this one is 10 mana anytime I win a battle, and 15 draft. So this one's a little bit better. We also get Sanguine Focus, which gives all magic damage instead of only base damage, and has a chance of bleeding, which ironically would actually stack with Flamer Focus later on. Then it also gives us Flesh Carved Runes, which allows us as a racial buff to ignore status resist on enemies per stack of bleeding, which works great with Sanguine Focus, which works great over here with the Tome of Pandemonium and Havoc magic. So Tome of the Bloodright beats Tome of Pyromancy at literally everything. It also has 2 combat spells, as if the devs were taunting you, but I would say they're actually a little bit better. You can argue they're better or they're worse. I mean, they're at the very least a side grade, but we have over here a better racial transformation, a better buff to mages, and Tome of Pyromancy is just not very good. If you're going melee, it's still as fine as it ever was, but it wasn't buffed for melee, it was trying to be buffed for mages. Okay, so there's my issues with Tome of Pyromancy. Tome of Mayhem. I want to talk about Tome of Mayhem for a second. This is a tier 2 tome. We have no economy. Chaos economy is so terrible. It is unbelievable how bad Chaos economy is. All their SPIs are terrible. They can barely even pay for their own armies. Chaos Affinity is a black hole of terribleness. But Tome of Mayhem is good for Mark of Misfortune. But my complaint here is Tome of Mayhem might as well be called Tome of Mark of Misfortune. Nothing else in this entire tome is good. Some of them are decent. Summon Gremlin summons a tier 2 unit, which is odd because other tomes, like Tome of Revelry allows you to build a tier 3 unit. go into nature and we look at Tome of Mists, this summons a tier 3 unit. This allows you to summon a tier 3 unit. So Chaos continues to summon out of the Tome of Mayhem merely a tier 2 unit. Curse of Misfortune starts the game kind of sort of decent, I guess, but it's not really that good. Then once you move to any better spell, you will never use this again. It's got a siege project that's okay, I guess, not too amazing though. And then it's got Incite Revolution, which sometimes can be okay, but often just feels like you're feeding your enemy extra experience by giving them a brigand camp to clear. You're giving them a clear on the brigand camp, which gives them resources, which gives them an item. So you can incite revolution on enemies and clear it yourself, which is okay. I've done that on free cities sometimes, just to farm a free city. I don't think that's the intended usage, but that's kind of the more exploited usage. You summon a brigand camp on the enemy, and then you just clear it yourself, and then you summon it, and then you clear it yourself. I've used that before. Tome of Mayhem, now Mark of Misfortune, is very, 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 very outrageously, hilariously powerful. At tier 2, this mark can basically win you fights without the enemy being able to do much. Being able to instantly inflict misfortune is very, very strong. But this does mean if enemies can cleanse the misfortune easily, then this entire tome does nothing. If enemies can stack fortune through the order, the order orb? What's it called? The order orb? Order matrix. There we go. If they can stack fortune to the order bolstering matrix, then that tome does nothing. It's a bit of a frustrating tome because if you can't deal with Mark of Misfortune, then you can get overrun by it. Because a 45% chance to graze your attack and take damage for doing it can, particularly early in the game, mean that you kill yourself rather than enemies by trying to kill them. But if you can cleanse it, or if you can stack fortune, then this tome does nothing, and then you feel bad because the one thing your tome does gets turned off. So, it has no SPI either, so Chaos Economy continues to be a joke. Tome of Revelry. Now, let's talk about Tome of Revelry. Once again, I remember all the complaints because I made the post. So Blood Fury Weapons was changed. It wasn't a buff, it wasn't a nerf, but it really didn't feel good because it was one of the only sources of morale that you could get. So, Blood Fury Weapons has now been side graded. However, Revels of Carnage, as I did mention, got nerfed. Combat XP has been reduced to half, so Revels of Carnage gives you significantly less experience. Tome of Revelry was a good tome. Reveler's Heart gives you 50% more morale growth, but you have no way to get morale other than to use a Scald with the Song of Revelry. It's a bit weird that it gives you 50% more morale gain, but the only way you can gain morale is by using a siege project or using an ability on a unit nobody wants to use. Now, the reason people don't want to use the Scald is because this is a non-racial unit. If this unit was made into a racial unit, it would instantly be used and people would love it, but it's not. The Scald is a fiend, although it looks like a racial unit, I assure you it's actually a demon. And that should just be changed, frankly. I think, I don't know how much dev time it would take, but I promise you, just take these cosmetics, apply this to a racial unit, and then just make the Scald a racial unit, and I assure you, this unit will be built. The fact that it's not racial hurts any potential it has to actually be viable, and actually is such a feels bad moment. The Infernal Fiend unit type is also just bad. -4 Frost, -4 Spirit Protection, so it gets slaughtered by undead, and it gets slaughtered by angels? That's not very good, devs. I think the Infernal Fiend unit type should be made -2, -2. That would be a good start. That would probably be a little bit helpful, but yeah. The Skull does have some good songs. They're really hard to position to use later in the game. I think they could also be made range 1, so you can like at least move the song 1 tile off your character. That would be a good buff to the Scald. Currently, right now, nobody, and I mean nobody, uses the Scald. So, yeah, the Scald should definitely be buffed. However, if we don't want to buff the Scald, and we don't want to buff Blood Fury Weapons, which should also be buffed, Blood Fury Weapons should apply to ranged units. It does Polearm, Shield, Shock, Fighter, Skirmisher, not ranged unit. Frankly, it should also apply to magic fighters as well to not be awkward, but at the very least, it should apply to ranged units. Then we should also buff the Carnival of Flesh. Much like all the other Chaos SPIs, the Carnival of Flesh is bad. 7 food, 7 draft is bad. This is being outperformed entirely merely by the passive 15 draft to Blood Altar without even factoring in the mana. I think it would be very reasonable very reasonable to buff it to 10 food, 10 draft, and then also to make it per adjacent farm 5 food, 5 draft. That would mean that if you put this next to a farm, that you could immediately get 15 food, 15 draft. That would actually be worth building. I would build that. Right now, it's not worth building. I would not build this. This means that Chaos has one really good SPI, and it's in the DLC tome, which in my opinion isn't the greatest look. So Tome of Revelry, let's buff the skull to make it racial. Even if we don't make it racial, then the songs need to be range 1 or range 2 so that they can be positioned a bit better throughout a fight. That needs to happen, like 100% that needs to happen. Blood Fury should also be buffed to affect range. And if Reveler's Heart, like if Skuld was actually worth using, then Reveler's Heart would actually have somebody to like use it. Basically, come on devs, like let's just give this one range. Like come on. Tome of Devastation's new spell is good, but the tome is extremely bloated. And I'm going to talk about a couple of these things here in a row. If we look at Tome of Dragons, it now has 6 spells. If we look at Tome of Devastation, it now has 6 spells. If we look at Tome of Chaos Channeling, 6 spells. Demon Gate, you might not believe this, 6 spells. Most of these Chaos Tomes have 2, maybe 3 spells that you actually want, and then a bunch of filler. And by having so much filler in these tomes, it just makes it so it's almost impossible to find good spells that you actually want to research. In Tome of Devastation, I do not really want Monstrous Rebirth. It's okay if I rush into it really hard, but then it just becomes a dead combat spell. We already have another combat spell, Flame Volley, now being added to it, which brings it up to 6 spells in the tome. Flame Volley is very good on a rush. Unfortunately, once we get to better spells from any other affinity, then we won't use Flame Volley anymore. Flame Burst Weapons is 20% crit, and killing an enemy causes it to explode, dealing damage to nearby enemies. At tier 2, Tome of Artificing gives you 25% crit. Killing enemies doesn't cause them to explode, but it's an earlier tier and more crit. So, frankly, if I want to get crit, I'm going to get the one with more crit that's easier to research at a lower tier. Okay, but then we got the Warbreed nobody wants. Focus and Devastation. This one's interesting, but it also, in my opinion, needs a buff. It gives battle mages, supports, and magic fighters a 60% chance of knocking enemies out of defense mode. Presumably, this was given so that Tome of Devastation allowed battle mages to knock enemies out of defense mode so then the Warbreed could charge down spearmen. At a 60% chance of proccing, it is not a very good chance of proccing. In addition to that, there is, you might not believe this, you'd be shocked to believe this, but in the very same tome is a buff to mages, giving them the very same Demolisher that you get from the Tome of whatever the one I was looking at, but then they also get Siegebreaker, but then they also get 10% more damage. 25% crit, 10% more damage to your mages, and then Tome of Devastation gives no damage to mages, Demolisher, not the other one that gives them bonus damage against fortification, and only 20% crit. So there's a real question here of why Tome of Devastation enchantments are being outperformed by a tome a tier lower than it. There's also a question of why we're getting 2 combat spells and a siege project. This is too much in the tome. In my opinion, and I know the devs aren't going to like this, I think Monstrous Rebirth should probably be yoinked out entirely, or at the very least they shouldn't add Flame Volley, or they should yoink out Devastator Sphere. I think Flame Volley is good, but the problem is I now want Monstrous Rebirth to be removed, and I want Construct Devastator Spheres to be removed because I just don't find it very good at all. I could maybe accept keeping Monstrous Rebirth and Flame Volley, but Devastator Spheres needs to go. Focus of Devastation also should get it should either get a 10% damage boost to mages, or its chance of knocking people out of defense mode needs to go to like 90%, so that it actually has a real chance of doing it. Because 60% through status resist is like a 20% chance. That's just terrible. 90% might be worth doing. Okay. That brings us to the Tome of Chaos Channeling. This one is mostly good with some obvious issues. Once again, Flamer Focus doesn't apply burning. So it only applies burning now, which gives it anti-synergy with the Tome of Pyromancy, but it also means that it doesn't apply 2 debuffs. It used to apply 2 debuffs when it was in the Tome of Dragons, and when it did that, that gave it 2 debuffs for Vessels of Chaos to get 20% damage. Once you applied Misfortune as well, that was 3 debuffs, meaning you could slap enemies with 1 firebomb, then the second firebomb immediately shot up to that 30% damage boost. But it's not the biggest deal, I suppose. It just kind of sucks. Vengeful Flames was buffed to do 5 damage to attackers, but then they made it affected by resistance, so it's often doing 1 to 2 damage, which is less than or equal to the amount it used to be when they buffed it. So it should not be affected by resistance. Fan the Infernal continues to be absolutely terrible. I don't know what's going on with this spell. This spell is so utterly pathetic. No further comment. Golden Horde is terrible. So once again, we're left in an awkward position where we've got a world map spell that I do not want and I will not use. We have another world map spell that arguably is good just for, removing terrain, just for being helpful. Like, it's arguably good. I don't like getting the Magma Spirit, but it's fine. It does a little bit of damage, turns everything to Ashlands, turns off terraforming, so it doesn't seem to remove Sunless, though, but it does remove Gloom. It does terraform things to your type. It does do damage. It does hit old provinces, so that's okay. Flame Incarnate is quite good, but reasonably, let's be real, Golden Horde should be outright removed to make it more consistent. Fan the Infernal should go to either 2 stacks of burning or 10 fire damage, or, and let's just be real, I think its casting cost needs to go down by a lot. Yeah. Sign of Flame will probably be fine after they probably bug fix it. I do think lava provinces have a bit of a problem, though. If you have a province that has lava but isn't a lava lake, then you don't get the lava buildings from it. This makes above ground desolate never able to get to the lava buildings. I think that's a huge problem, in my opinion. I think any province with lava should give you access to the lava buildings. That would be reasonable, in my opinion. Tome of Chaos Channeling is almost good, but once again, we have no SPI. And then we have a dud spell, a dud spell, and a dud spell. If it was just these 3 and I could get these 3 every time, it would actually be a buff to this tome. For now, this needs to be buffed. Abyssal Flames is not very good. Unlike the Tome of the Cold Dark, I think reasonably what it should do is Abyssal Flames should give enemies like -1 fire resist as a debuff. Kind of like how the Lightning Tome does it. Even -1 fire resist would help a little bit. Maybe -2, but I'd accept even -1. Then Golden Horde, this is absolutely terrible, and it should just be totally yoinked off the game. Tome of the Demon Gate, this one has a huge problem right now. As I did mention with the Tome of Geomancy, it got you a racial transform, and it got you a buff for your melee, and it got you a tier 4 battle mage. Tome of the Demon Gate gives you a worse racial transform, and oh, well, it doesn't give you anything. Gremlin Ambushers is kind of sort of okay, I guess, but gremlins at this point in the game will probably not do a lot. You do get up to 5 of them, but reasonably, like, they're just not going to amount to much. And you have to fight in a city to make it useful. And if they have a spell blocker, then you can't cast it on their city. But it's kind of good, almost. Like, it's almost good. Sacrificial Slaughter is almost good. Almost. The problem is there's so many debuff removals between Ice Giant, between that stupid order thing that got added, Pure Soul, between all this stuff. Like, it's really hard to make debuffs effective these days, and so blowing up my own unit is not something I really want to do. And then when we look at this casting cost, once again, 140. I'm blowing up my own unit. I have to be tier 4 to get 4 debuffs on enemies, and I'm killing my own unit, killing my own tier 4 unit. Like, at a certain point, my question is, hey man, could Chaos's, you know, tier 4 spells go down in casting cost? They're not powerful enough. This one, if this one was 10 damage, maybe 15 damage, I could accept it, right? This one, Sacrificial Slaughterer, how about we do like a little bit more damage maybe? 40 damage and a bunch of debuffs for blowing my unit up. I mean, maybe we go up to like 25 and lower the casting cost. That takes us to demonic summoning. No one has ever used this ever. Okay. Fight for power can be okay. You summon, or I should say you craft 2 Warbreeds, turn them into a Balor. Yeah, not too bad. Summon Balor, let me explain. This one's great. This one's absolutely fantastic. 300 world map casting, 300 mana, and you lose 2 population to get a tier 5 mythic. Great. It's cool. It's in a tier 4 tome now. If only there wasn't any other example of a unit being better. Fallen Angel is 300 casting, so the same, and then Souls. Souls aren't that hard to come by. So the same world map casting, summonable anywhere on the map, and doesn't cause you to lose 2 population. So much like everything else Chaos does, it's like someone else's spell but weaker. I mean, it is. It literally is any summon spell but weaker. I mean, if we look at anybody. I mean, we could look at Nature. We could look at Tome of Nature's Wrath. Summon Horde God, 300, no debuff. So, yeah, the Balor recently got nerfed. Maybe he was worth 2 population when he was like giga top tier, but he has been nerfed. And frankly, I just don't think that he's worth this much anymore. Additionally, unlike certain other tomes that have a tier 4 transformation and maybe some big buffs, if we look here at the Tome of the Archon again, let's actually look at this. So we get Pure Soul, huge racial buff. Holy Aura, big buff for your melee. Astra buffs all your Archons, your angels. So we've got a big buff for your angels, and a big buff for your angels, and a big buff for your angels. Then over here in Chaos, we have you can become a demon, and you can kill your own demons, and you can kill your free city, and you can kill your own demons again, and you can kill your own population. And you're weaker for it. All the things I just mentioned that kill all your own people are not as strong as what Order does just for existing. Order literally takes no debuffs and summons better things than you do for taking 1,000,000 debuffs. Now in the past, I would say it's just been DLC creep, but this is the buffed version of the tome. The buffed version of this tome is weaker than Order just like happening to pick a tome and play the game. Okay, let's move on to Tome of the Chaos Sword. I do like it, but there's 2 things I'm going to change. One is a nerf. Yes, I'm actually suggesting a nerf. Demonic Onslaught should not give killing momentum to heroes. Now in the past, this was probably totally overlooked because nobody really cared. It was really difficult to get to tier 5 Chaos. Tier 5 Chaos was terrible, and it was better to go with any other tome. However, now that tier 5 Chaos is actually at least intended to be reasonable to go and does have some buffs, giving killing momentum to heroes is a very, very bad idea. This will allow Rangers to scattershot into scattershot. This allows Warlocks to steal soul, reset all their cooldowns. For example, an Eldritch Warlock or an Eldritch Warlock or a Vampire Warlock can use this. They can use all their abilities, then steal soul, reset their cooldowns, get killing momentum, get an AP, use all their abilities again. It's a bit strong. So I would just recommend this goes to all attacking units get hastened and non-heroes get killing momentum. Phrase it like that. Additionally, I think it's just a little bit too costly. 150 mana and 50 world map casting. Can we be real for a second? Can we actually be honest with ourselves? Let's be honest with ourselves, okay? 150 mana and 50 combat casting. Okay. Order gets that for 30 mana and 25 combat casting, and it gives strengthened. So maybe let's yoink this casting down a bit or make it stronger. How about we get 3 fortune and these buffs, but no killing momentum to heroes, or let's just reduce the cost. Let's reduce the cost. Like, I don't know why everything in Chaos needs you. Basically, there's no way to play Chaos without being Astral or Shadow. Shadow for death magic, or Astral to just stack world map combat casting. Like, how could you cast these Chaos spells? It's impossible. It just couldn't be done. And it's so weird to me. Like, even when we go into Tome of Calamity, Comet of Calamity, like, kaboom, right? But even look at that. Comet of Calamity, 30 damage and a huge chance to freeze and 2 stacks of Ghostfire. AoE2. Then we look into Chaos Channeling, Fan the Infernal, same combat casting. Yes, it's global, but no CC chance. 1/6 of the damage and 1 stack of debuff. Okay, look, it's just not comparable. These are not on the same power level. Okay. Reduces combat casting. Number 2, Demonic Siphon gives Infernal Might whenever a unit dies. Pretty good, I would argue, pretty good. However, Infernal Might gives Fiends 3% crit chance. Now, if this is supposed to be a buff because the Fiend Tome is so bad that Fiends need a second buff here, I think that's... Well, I mean, I don't think that's good game design. I think it's lazy, because we could make the Fiend Tome good and make it so people actually want to go them, right? We don't need a second buff for Fiends over here, because this is already supposed to be the enchantment. If we look over here in Nature, there is a similar issue, I'll admit. Force of Nature gives buffs to Animal, Cavalry, Fae, Plant, Dragons, and Naga. So Force of Nature doesn't buff one person over another. I will admit, Mass Rejuvenation brings back animals and plants, so you are heavily encouraged if you want to use Mass Rejuvenation to turn your people into plants so you can revive them. So I will admit, Tome of the Goddess of Nature does have a similar situation where it goes, all the creature types I'm buffing are equal, but this one is more equal. Chaos has that same problem, but let's be real, I don't think that they should play favorites. Dragons are just as much buffed by Chaos, and this brings me to another problem. Well, number one, let me finish my thoughts here. I think everybody should get that 3% crit, and then they should just buff the Demon Gate, because the Demon Gate is miserable. It doesn't need a second buff because it's so bad, it just needs to be worth picking on its own. Because it still won't be picked, because it sucks that bad. But let's talk about this. Accursed Fiend, Elemental, Dragon. Do you notice something missing here? That's right, Undead. There is a problem with Shadow, and this was a big problem, and I did complain about it back then. Tome of the Revenant is not Order Shadow, it's just Shadow. All it does is buff Undead. Order has nothing to do with Undead. Chamber of the Right buffs, Undead. Undead Resentment buffs, Undead. Unholy Champion, Undead. Revenant Whispers summons Undead. Fallen Angel is Undead. Necropolis, you might not believe it, gives you souls to summon Undead. This entire tome is Undead. It has nothing to do with Order. It's only Order because Malore. Which is fine, I guess, but like it basically means that they added an Order Shadow Tome, but really they meant a Shadow Tome. It was Order Shadow, but it was just double Shadow. Now we have Tome of the Crimson Rain, which is Chaos Shadow, but really they mean it's just Shadow. But should that really be how things are? Because I don't think so. Realistically, let's be honest, Tome of the Chaos Lord should either buff Undead, or we should just be real on this one. Maybe Shadow just shouldn't be getting all this shit. You know, maybe Shadow shouldn't have just gotten all these tomes in these expansions that were only for Shadow. If this affected Undead, would it be overpowered? Yeah, probably. I mean, it would open up a second avenue for Undead that they could go into more tomes. Right now, the best tome for Undead is actually Astral, not Shadow. It's actually Astral, which is really weird. You know, not a lot of people like that, but it does raise the question of if undead were really meant to be part chaos, with Tome of the Bloodright buffing all the vampire bleeding, and then with Tome of the Crimson Raid also being in chaos, were they actually meant to be chaos, or were they just shadow again? Because that, if they were shadow, that would mean shadow got 3 different expansions to themselves in a row, which we know they did, and I guess I'm just hinting that I don't really like that shadow got 3 expansions. I guess this is me complaining back on the vampire expansion. Those complaints, they've been bubbling under the surface this whole time. And now it's pretty obvious that yes, Shadow did just get buffed for 3 expansions in a row. No one else got much content other than Order. It was just Shadow eating everything. Shadow, the goddamn hedgehog, took everything. They're like, this is going to be a Chaos and Shadow expansion. And Shadow just like pushed Chaos out. It was like, yum, 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 it's all mine. Chaos was like, what, do I get anything? They're like, fuck off, kid. Chaos is like, oh, okay. So that's a complaint. It's actually a complaint that I have. It's very obvious now that we see Demonic Siphon not buffing Undead, despite the fact Undead were technically supposed to be half Shadow, half Chaos. It just, yeah, so huge complaint there. It is weird that they buff Elementals but not Undead, but it does make sense, because now you can actually do Chaos Battle Mages with Elemental. If it didn't buff Elemental, I think that'd be a downgrade. I do like that it does buff these different things. Accursed Fiend, Elemental Dragon. These are all good things. I like every single one of them. These are all very good. So that's all I can say for that. But I will just say that I do have some issues. You could go Accursed Trickster for tier 4 here, but at the end of the day, if you want to get a Battle Mage for Chaos Battle Mages and you want to get a transformation, you're going Tome of the Geomancer, because you buff it up with tier 5 Chaos and you get a Battle Mage, and then you can use all the other tomes. So you can go Pandemonium, and then you can go Geomancer, and then you can go Chaos Channeling, get your Geomancer, the Flamer Focus, and then you can go Calamity into, like, you see how much that works. But the problem is, there's no world where Demon Gate ever works here. Demon Gate never works here, ever. So that's a problem. I would say that's actually kind of a problem. And it's kind of a problem with how they do things, because reasonably Demon Gate should work here by giving you Chaos Eater. But again, as I've mentioned, because Chaos Eater does not get racial buffs because he's non-racial, and because he's not a magical fighter, so he doesn't get tanky, he's too squishy to compete late game. And he's not racial, so he can't compete late game with all those enchantments and form buffs and stuff. And yeah, I think that there's just some issues with some of the stuff that need to be addressed. There need to be more tier 4 racials. They need to make non-tier 4 racials more usable, in my opinion. I think they need to come up with a system where you can apply racial transformations to a different race. So for example, I could apply... Let me look here. In the same way that I could apply a racial transformation to my race, or a race that I conquered, I should be able to apply flesh-carved runes to demons. I should be able to say, fiends, now all my fiends get flesh-carved runes. I think it would be a great change. I think that would make constructs far more viable. Like, you would still have to transform your race, then you would have to transform that race. So like, it would be a downside. You'd have to pay a lot more mana for it, right? But I think it would massively improve the game and make a lot more builds viable. That's all I was saying with all this chaos stuff. We're not done. We got a bit more to go over. If it sounded like I was wrapping up, I was not wrapping up. That was just my mid-game, oh my god, why did we make 3 expansions buffing Shadow in a row rant? Now let's talk about Nature. Okay, so Nature got a lot of buffs, and I feel like it's fair to mention them because there were some changes made. Tome of Glades. They did buff Tome of Glades a little bit, but I feel they need to go a bit further, because in particular, there's a call out here. I did mention that the Primal Protector now gets 30 heal every single turn, which really calls into question just how bad Aspect of the Root is. This is an enchantment that you need to research, that you need to pay for, that heals you 30, the same ability, on a 2-turn cooldown. Tome of the Glades is not overpowered. If you removed the cooldown entirely from Aspect of the Root, it would still very likely not see play. This is not a good tome, and this is frankly not that great of ability. It's okay on a tier 1 unit that you get for free and can just spam it indefinitely, but to enchant this and get this onto only polearms and only shield units, this is really not that good. So Tome of Glades, in my opinion, really could use Aspect of the Root, losing the cooldown entirely. Glade Runner is also not that good. I'm not saying he's unusable, but he's not that good. There are 3 tier 3 archers. Well, there's technically 4, but we don't talk about the lost one. There are 3 tier 3 archers, and the Glade Runner is worse than the Wind Runner, and he's worse than the Longbow. So he's just not as good as the other 2. I think that they could use some buffs to him. I think maybe Tracker's Mark could go to 1 turn cooldown. That would buff the item that uses it, which might be a bit much, but Glade Runner has some problems. All other archers can use special abilities to avoid high dodge chance, but Glade Runner can't. So I do think Glade Runner could use a bit of a buff on this one. Entwined Protector did get buffed a little bit. We can see this once per battle heal 20 AoE defense mode. Oh, right. Yeah, that's why these units suck. So I think that could be boosted up a little bit. They do have this... They give up 1 damage on their attack to have a chance to poison. I don't think it's good either. I think Entwined Protector got buffed a little bit, but like, he's still not really that good. The Sacred Meadow is okay, but actually it's not okay. It's actually really bad. This is really, really bad, the Sacred Meadow. I think it should be buffed to like 20 food. Just give it 20 food, and then 5 city stability per adjacent conduit or forester or farm, or you'll give it like a bunch of stuff. Sacred Meadow is awful. Leaf Skin got nerfed a little bit because resistance is weaker, so that also makes this tome weaker. I think realistically Tome of Glade should be better. They did create forest affect adjacent provinces, and you can use it aggressively as well, but I don't think that buff made this tome good, and frankly I think Leaf Skin getting weaker made the entire tome weaker to begin with. Tome of Paradise has some serious problems. I'm going to keep mentioning it. The game's pace just doesn't work with Tome of Paradise. Not only does nature itself have no way to increase global casting, but once we get to Tome of Paradise, if you want to put Fortress of Vines on a city, that's 200 world map casting. Then, if you want to put Blessing of Paradise on a city, that's 200 world map casting. Then you want to put Enchanted Bloom on a city, that's 150 world map casting. Then you have to get guys chosen for 600 world map casting. What I'm trying to say here is there's a lot of world map casting here. I think what the devs should do, and I've mentioned this a lot, Enchanted Bloom, Blessing of Paradise, and Fortress of Vine should have their world map casting costs reduced, halved even, but in return they should have more upkeep. Then by having more upkeep, it would actually give nature something to do with their utterly insanity mana generation. Then they could have Tome of Paradise, cost all this mana to upkeep, but buff everybody. We could have Blessing of Paradise, give you more city stability, Enchanted Bloom come into the game too late to be useful, and then Fortress of Vine to give your units unit ranks and be actually really, really strong. Oh my god, it's so powerful. Garden of Bliss also exists. Gives you more city stability and more food into mana, which is okay, I guess. So then we mentioned Tome of the Stormborn. I know I mentioned that next. Yes, Tome of the Stormborn is a mess. Okay. This spell, or I should say this entire tome, is jank. Number one, here's my opinion. I think that Mass Rejuvenation should bring back animals, plants, and Naga, because it's right here and it should bring them back to life. Otherwise, every Stormbringer is encouraged to go plant transformation. Now, the Naga transformation could be fine. It's not even a bad transformation, it's just not a particularly good one, really. But the fact that it doesn't work that perfectly with Tome of the Goddess of Nature means that a lot of people prefer not to use it. The Stormbringer itself has been nerfed a billion times. Not going to go over it, we already talked about magical fighters. Stormport requires you to be on the coast, which means you need to have water in your map. That's janky. I mean, I know it's supposed to be a water tome, but like, what if you don't have water on your map? What if you didn't spawn with it? But what if you wanted to use the tier 4 magical fighter? Do you just not get to use the tier 4 magical fighter because you didn't spawn on a water map? The second thing you can do is the Bounty of Sea, which also buffs being on the coast because you're on a water map. Primal doesn't work on the coast either. It doesn't buff the terrain. Downpour is okay. Lightning Storm is okay. Wet was nerfed to -2 lightning protection instead of -4. So this tome did get nerfed. It is a bit weaker, of course. It was probably a fair nerf, but the tome's never been very good since then. Stormbringer keeps getting nerfed, and the Naga transformation is probably the most rare transformation. No, Ethereal's probably the most rare transformation, but it's just nobody wants to go Naga because fast movement isn't very good. If it was very fast movement, if Naga transformation was very fast and mass rejuvenation was changed to bring them back to life as well, then I think we could do a Stormborn and a Goddess of Nature. It might be a bit of a overbuff, maybe, probably not, but at the very least it would make it viable, because right now it's just not something anybody does. So that's all I have to say about Nature Tomes. Other affinities. Okay, we need to talk about this then. Order Buff Ball is extremely tedious to fight. Now, if you ever watched my games, you'd know that like half the players at any given time are playing Order Buff Ball because it makes sense. It's kind of fun to play. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Whenever you play this game a lot and you play any sort of melee build, you'll be like, oh, I should just do XXX, and then you're like, wait, I'm Order Buff Ball again. Order Buff Ball is effectively what I mean when you're stacking Bolster, Strengthen, Fortune, then you're using the order buffs with either Tome of the Construct, Pyre Templars, or Sanctuary. It's pretty easy for your builds to end up that way. You're playing the game and you think, oh, I should go Tome of Zeal to buff up all my melee. And then you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, Tome of Construct also buffs up all my melee. And then you think to yourself, oh, well, Tome of Prophecies buffs up my melee. Ooh, Tome of Sanctuary buffs up all my melee. Or maybe you didn't go Tome of Zeal, and then you think, ooh, I can go Cleansing Flame, and I can get Pyre Templars. And then you're at tier 4, and you're like, oh, I can go Tome of the Archon, and I can get Pure Soul and Holy Aura for all my melee. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm Order Buff Ball again. This also goes into their heroes. Level 16 Order heroes can just generate infinite morale, which means they have absolutely nothing to worry about from morale bombing. It's very, very difficult to deal with Order buff balls. There's a few things you can do to try to beat it, but there's not many. Unfortunately, one of the things you can try to do to beat it is the Order Amplifier Lens, which allows you to AoE remove all positive buffs from enemies. You can use the Order Amplifier Lens on Unholy Champion because Tome of the Revenant is technically half Order. Technically. So Unholy Champion is technically an Order spell, allowing it to AoE strip all buffs off enemies. You can also use it with Righteous Ignition from the Tome of the Pyre Templar, which allows you to then AoE strip all buffs, or you can use a Vampire Warlock to AoE strip all buffs of their spam AoEs. Other than that, there's really no way to strip enemies of all their buffs. There was Tome of Corruption that did get nerfed to be single target, because when it was multi-target, it broke the game. But basically, we're running into a typical card game problem here, where Order Buff Ball is so overpowered that anything that beats Order Buff Ball is overpowered. And then anything that beats Order Buff Ball gets nerfed, enforcing Order Buff Ball to continue to be more and more overpowered. Do you see the problem here? Anytime something beats it, it's going to be very overpowered to get nerfed, but then that just keeps enforcing Order Buff Ball to keep being the best thing ever. So basically my suggestion here is I think Bolster should be a stack max of 3 and debuff max of 5. That way you cannot get enemies debuff below 5. You can't sunder enemies below 5, but you can't buff yourself above 3. I think that'd be more fair on both ends. Strengthen going to 5 is also a bit jank, frankly. Maybe Strengthen should stack up to 3, but there's so much frenzy in the game and there's so many ways to add it that would be a bit janky as well. I'm not really sure what they do on that one. Basically, Order buff balls need to be less strong, and there needs to be less encouragement to do Order buff balls. Okay. Not totally applicable here, but we're going to talk about Order for 1 second. Order gives you 3 Fortune. 3 Fortune gives you 30% crit. Order then also gives you high morale just for existing. That's 50% crit. Order opens the game and already just has 50% crit. That's a lot of crit. First off, that's a huge damage boost for absolutely no reason. But second off, that means every time they attack you, they have a 1/2 chance to crit. Crits reduces your morale by 5. In addition to Order having absolutely maximum morale at all given points of time and no hope of you ever reducing it, but they will slowly reduce your morale. Even if neither of you are dying, your morale will slowly get reduced by being crit. That means if you find a build that could actually fight Order, let's say plants, and you fight Order, and Order fights you, and you use your plants, and maybe you out-tank Order, and maybe you use Tome of Cycles, and you get Blades of Decay, and you can actually start to slowly whittle them away, you will always be moraled out. You can try to prevent it by spamming the one morale ability in the entire game, Exhilarating Pollen. But then let's talk about the second problem. I did mention the Order bolstering matrix granting you 3 fortune. So Order will permanently have high morale. They will permanently have 30% crit from fortune, 20% crit from high morale. That's a big damage boost, right? Nature, on the other hand, will get 10 healing. That's not a lot of compensation. 10 healing will not be a lot. This will not do anything. So Order will, by default, outpace Nature. They will crit you down, and if you try to go spell for spell, increasing your morale to keep pace with how much crit you're taking to reduce your morale, you will take more damage, because they will just have more morale, they will have more fortune, they will have 50% chance to crit. You won't be high morale because you'll be sitting there getting crit about as much morale as you're recovering from Exhilarating Pollen. Basically, there's nothing. Like, it just simply off the base mechanics, Order buff ball just beats everything right now. That's why if you ever look at my games, nobody's tried plants. Nobody's tried, I've tried Chaos a lot. It's basically impossible to beat Order buff ball. Order buff ball is just so frustrating to fight. Removing mass buffs relies on Order Lens, using Zealous Inquisition, or Unholy Champion, or a Vampire Lord Warlock. Not too many realistic options. So basically, if you want to fight Order buff ball, you can go Astral Shadow and just try to beat them with Astral Shadow against Order buff ball. Those are the 2 most popular ways to play. The other ways, you basically just go Vampire Lord. Vampire Lord! You can use Unholy Champion. Unholy Champion is one way to strip all their buffs off, but Order buff ball will beat Undead given enough time, unless those Undead are, of course, using Astral Shadow. You get into the problem. Sundering Blades, in my opinion, is scaling a bit too well. It used to only reduce defense and most damage would stop being defense by mid to late game, but now all melee damage is defense. Therefore, these Sundering Blades increase all melee damage, even elemental damage. Now, I don't think they need that much of a nerf in the early game, hence why I'm recommending they get like a really high proc chance. I would actually just recommend like 120%, so it basically always procs, but as the game goes on, this starts contributing way too much damage to the game, and it does need to start being reduced by status resist and start being resisted unless enemies actually bring in status penetration. It also means, Sundering Blades, that because it can currently stack to 10, that it is way too easy for these people to punch down and kill lords, even very tanky lords. I've seen extraordinarily tanky defenders get all their bolstered defense stripped away, then get reduced down by 10 defense, and you'll see defenders who are even at like 17 defense end up at like 2. And then once they're at 2 defense, they're not resisting a whole lot of damage, and then they're just getting their ass beat by like a bunch of dudes. Okay. Tome of Shades just continues to be frustrating as hell to fight. Tome of Shades, in my opinion, is such a bad tome for the game's balance. Tome of Shades, because Living Shadows and Shadowblades. Pretty easy. I mean, that's it, right? Living Shadows gives you evasion, which it doesn't really need to do, which makes it very hard to play range builds. By default, range builds are already punished by life. just for existing. Trying to attack these people is already going to start taking a penalty. You have a 90% hit chance down to 80%. Then they might have rapid reflexes due to how OP it is, meaning you have a base 55% chance to hit. That's not a good chance when you're already in an ideal range. That's not good. Okay. But then should you get blinded because you attack an enemy within 2 spaces, which does mean that you tried to melee them, if you do get blinded, they now have a 50% penetration on your defense, which is a lot, which means that even if they don't go Sundering Blades, they can just remove half your defense anyway. So Living Shadows already makes them tankier to any sort of ranged attacks, and then Shadow Blades means that if you try to fight them in melee, that they'll win the melee confrontation as well. Tome of Shades just continues to be a very frustrating tome. If you build very tanky, and you can live through the enemy attacks, then Living Shadows and Shadow Blades wins it. As I mentioned, basically everything comes back to order buff ball. It just makes the most sense. I mean, it does. You build tanky, oh, now I can use Tome of Shades. You build tanky, oh, now Sanctuary makes sense. You build tanky, well, why don't I just go Archon and get Holy? Well, I go tanky, and I don't get... It just, everything you do leads to building tanky right now, leads to order buff ball. Okay. Beasts and Dragons. I'm just going to make one comment on this one. I think Beasts in the early game are doing quite well now. They did do a pretty good buff. I would say that the Beasts in the early game are keeping up with other people. You get 10 HP, 1 defense, 1 resist for early game Beasts. So even things like the previously shitty Gore-Tusk Piglet will, as a player, get 75 HP, 2 defense, 1 resist. That means that they at least keep pace with some other stuff. They're not as good, but they keep pace. For example, if I was to look at Dark. If I was to look at Dark Immortal, he's got 75-2-1, but he'll obviously come down to like 83-3 with like rapid reflexes, because he'll use trade points to make himself tankier, right? So at the very least, animals right now are more comparable to racial units. Maybe not you. Yeah, you can see like they're more comparable to racial units now, which makes them way more usable. The problem is that buff doesn't really scale into the late game. By tier 3, you're going to start falling off a little bit. Well, maybe not you. You're like a truck. Why are you such a truck? You can see Unicorn would end up being not as good as a racial unit. But, you know, maybe still decent enough at tier 3. Tier 4, when things start to go downhill. Tier 4 animals are obviously a bit weaker than racial units, even with the buffs that they give them. Now, they are low maintenance. I don't know why they're all low maintenance. I feel like maybe they should have made the buff bigger and then had it remove low maintenance. But it does mean that tier 1 animals are good. Tier 2, tier 3, they stay fine. But tier 4, they start falling off a little bit, I would say. The Phoenix did get a rework. Ice Spider Matriarch became a... unfortunately, this unit became... Hunter Spider. Ice Spider. Where's Ice Spider? Ice Spider Matriarch became Magic Fighter, so she's terrible now. So most people are moving on to the Hunter Spider and trying to use Dire Bear. Dire Bear and White Wolf are at least doing decent now with their buffs. Hunter Spider is the really big one that people are doing. I think you can do Hunter Spider with... Is that the one you can do with Vampire Lord? I'd have to check. But, you know, they at least look decent enough. They look decent enough, right? So, okay. I just wanted to say that I think maybe the buff to tier 4 beasts should be like maybe like 15 HP or 20, maybe like 10 HP. And if it's tier 4, it's like 15 to 20 HP. That'd be a little bit better. That's about it. Yeah, so you can read this entire thing if you want to get my thoughts on all of it. But that's what I said were the major issues. Again, I do want to end with the idea that I think the game is massively improved right now. It is better. It is good. Don't think that I'm saying the game is bad by any stretch of the imagination. These are just my issues with the game. I think that this patch is a colossal improvement to the game. I am looking forward to playing a lot more on this patch, a lot more with other people. Look forward to way more content that I'm going to make. If you have any ideas for videos or anything you want me to make, I want to do a lot more videos again because I'm more interested in the game again. Shockingly, the more I'm interested in the game, the more I want to make content on it. So if you have any ideas, the current thoughts I have are some people want to see hero builds. I'm not sure how I could stretch out a hero build video to even 30 minutes. I mean, even for me, that would be a stretch, right? But hero builds are an idea. Maybe I could like pack multiple into one video. People like seeing build videos and entire, well, builds that I do. Mid-game tutorial. I think some people ask for a mid-game tutorial. I've got an idea for that one. Extreme new player tutorial. That one is also something that I probably should do. I kind of looked around. There doesn't seem to be like, here's how to click your very first buttons kind of tutorials type stuff. But if you guys have any ideas, make sure to, you know, give me them. They're always very helpful for me. And, you know, again, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a comment down below. All these things help me out immensely. And if you want to join my Patreon, that also shockingly helps me out immensely. Probably not for this video because 3 AM, but in the future I do intend to put people who subscribe to my Patreon. I should probably click off the spider. Some of you guys have arachnophobia. I've been trying to be aware that, I don't know, it's not too many people, but some people truly, it's like, But anyway, if you do subscribe to my Patreon, I will probably put you in the credits at the end of some videos, or read names or something like that. Yeah, so anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. And as always, I hope all of you have a great rest of your day.